Thank you very much to that first panel, and anyone who's taken a break, I hope they will be sure to come back for the next panel, because there were some mentions of artificial intelligence in this first panel, and clearly this is a topic that certainly keeps me up at nights. I'm glad that we're going to be focusing on it at the Institute, because the world is racing headfirst into a new era that will affect how we live, how we work, literally how we think, and how we relate to each other. I think it's fair to say that AI offers a lot of promises, but it also offers new threats that have to be navigated, and we're already seeing signs that authoritarian regimes around the world have gotten better and better at creating and weaponizing new technologies like AI to subvert, manipulate, obfuscate. And the biggest tech companies themselves are not just, sadly, often enabling authoritarian regimes, but the way that they are acting in the world, oftentimes with impunity, and without regard to the consequences of the technology they control, is also seriously concerning. So for years, academics and economists, some here at Columbia, have been warning that advances in machine learning and robotics will have dramatic effects on job markets. Disinformation research, as Joe was referencing, have raised alarms about AI chatbots propagating conspiracy theories and false narratives. So the risks are quite significant, as the promises also hold out hope that it will make a positive difference. We have to figure out more effectively how we're going to manage the world that will be created. So we have an amazing panel. Join me, please, in welcoming to the stage Marietje Ressa, Nobel laureate, prize-winning journalist. And IGP distinguished fellow, as well as Karen and I are very grateful she was in our class talking about these issues last week. Marietje Schaake, International Policy Director at Stanford University Cyber Policy Center. We're thrilled to have Stanford in the house. Thank you very much. But also your background in Dutch politics, European politics, dealing with a lot of these issues is very relevant. Timothy Wu, Julius Silver, Professor of Law, Science, and Technology here at Columbia. Timothy has been outspoken and very substantive in raising questions and concerns about the era that we are moving into. And our moderator, Nick Thompson, CEO of The Atlantic. Thank you very much.
Wow, normally you're introduced by voice of God. Today we got Secretary Clinton, so slight downgrade, but very close. All right, let's get going. We have an amazing panel. We have an amazing audience. So excited for this. I want to kind of break this conversation into three parts. We'll start a little bit about where we are in AI, where we think it's going, what's unanswered about AI. We'll then talk about threats to democracy, authoritarianism, and then we'll get into how you regulate it, because we have some strong and I hope differing opinions on how to do that. So let's get cracking. Professor Wu, to you.
Yeah, she does this sometimes, yeah.
What to you is the most interesting unanswered question about AI? And I mean by that, what do we not know about where it's heading that is still undetermined, that is important to the rest of this conversation?
Yeah, it's a good question, a good place to start. I think the number one thing we don't know at this point are the limits or the plateaus. So I think there's a sense in the public consciousness that the potential of AI is unlimited, that it will sort of exponentially change everything on the planet Earth. I think that's possible. The history of technology suggests that most technologies at some point reach a limit. Sometimes it can be related to a business model, or sometimes just related to physics, laws of nature, other things. If you go back to the 60s or 50s, commercial airlines were beginning, and I think there was a sense that airlines and airplanes would continue to get better and better and better, and then maybe we would take airlines to the moon, or I don't know what we'd say. But at some point it started leveling out. And if you go into an airplane today, it's very similar to the ones in the 1960s, but the seats are a lot smaller. So, things tend to level out. Now, things sometimes go much further than people might have thought. General computing, really developed in the 40s and 50s, has legitimately transformed everything. But other things peter out or reach limits, and I think we really don't know what those are. It's possible to look back at 5 or 10 years and being like, well, the chat and the images, that was extraordinary, but we didn't really get much further, maybe a little more like virtual reality, where people were like, this is going to be everything, and then we sort of seem to have gotten stuck, maybe it'll get better. So we don't want to, I'm not insisting there are those limits, or we've reached them, we just don't know.
All right, same question, Marietje.
So what I wonder about is mostly about who has agency over this technology. Because when I talk to engineers at tech companies, at AI companies, and I express my concern about the fact that academics don't have access to information to do independent research, or that policymakers don't have access to information to properly regulate or to understand what kind of next steps are needed with regard to laws and regulations. Some engineers say smilingly, well, we don't know what AI is going to lead to either. Because part of the excitement for them is the unknown, the sort of experimental quality of this technology, that it may come up with completely unexpected outcomes. And so I think ultimately the question is who has a grip, both in terms of understanding the technology, but also in terms of being able to handle, pause, steer this technology.
But not use. We'll all be able to use it. Your concern is who's going to be steering it and who's going to understand it.
Yes. Who has agency over it?
Okay. Maria?
A little bit of what both said, but for me, I'm much more focused on safety, harm, accountability, and responsibility, right? So think about it like this, and so lose the word AI and think COVID vaccine. We needed a COVID vaccine right away. We were all running for it, but we didn't let loose the COVID vaccine in the public until it was tested, even though it was fast. What we've seen in terms of AI, and the first time it was really rolled out, was social media and technology that connects us. I became a journalist because information is power, and that wasn't really factored into the equation of social media at that point in time. And what we have seen since then is tremendous harm to society that has led to the breaking up of the public sphere, lies turned into facts, and facts turned into lies. That has affected every part of society. So the question is, who was responsible? Who is accountable? What about the harms that our younger generation is facing? Here's the thing with the next generation AI, right? With large language models, so many unanswered questions in terms of, can it just suck up everything we are, everything we know, everything the Atlantic has pulled together and paid for? Can it just suck all of that up and then create something and not give anything back? 2, what is the damage of whatever that is? Because you hear, it's fantastic to hear, we want regulation, but then to also say, to scare you into saying, but we must get ahead of China. China, by the way, has restrictions on it. The last thing I'll say is, we've had technology like this before. It is CRISPR technology, genetics. We have the capacity to customize babies if we wanted to. But humanity was wise enough, America was wise enough to put guardrails on that technology. Why are we not putting guardrails on the technology that is insidiously manipulating our emotions to change the way we see the world and ultimately the way we act? Sorry, anger.
No, good. Anger's useful. On the question of the Atlantic, we are now blocking them. So we have put a big padlock on the barn door after the horses have well left.
But the question for that then is, will you be searchable?
Well, we can get into that. That will get into a very complicated legal battle of which I should probably not speak on stage with a law professor. Let me ask a theme that seemed to come up in all three of them. I get the sense that all three of you would like this to slow down, right? Tim raised the question of like, maybe it will slow down because technology slows down. Airlines have gotten worse. Maybe AI will slow down. Do you all want this to kind of relax a little bit? Marietje?
Yeah, well, I think the crucial question is when should an AI product be pushed onto the market? So I'm all in favor of doing research for the sake of understanding innovations, driving innovations. But right now, there's no public interest process that assesses whether a new product is ready with regard to safety, with regard to our democracy, with regard to national security, a big topic that people are concerned about, to just be available. You know, should large language models be released? Should products that have hardly been tested in the public interest simply be put onto the market? And the drivers behind putting it out for release are, of course, that interaction with these AI products improve them. So the incentives for the companies are to push them out as quickly as possible. There's, you know, cutthroat competition between the companies, so they're also keen to be the first to put out a new version and to stay relevant, get new investments, et cetera. So it's not so much, I think, about slowing down, but having the use of these technologies in a responsible, controlled way.
But one could counter, well, they have to comply with the law, right? If you release an AI model and it violates privacy law, or if it does, you know, it leads to a terrorist attack, you have legal protections that exist for the internet. So it's not like they have an exemption from the law as it exists.
Well, I think the question is, where is the state of the law? And that differs a great deal. And in this country, where the biggest, most powerful AI companies operate, the law lags behind significantly. And so on the one hand, I think there are questions, and I'm happy to hear answers from people who have looked at this in greater detail, but how US law applies. So the statement from the Biden administration appropriately is that law applies to AI and other technologies. Of course, law applies to everyone equally in a rule of law-based society. But I don't think there's clarity about how. And the main question that brings me back to my first point is who has agency to understand. So with AI, that is fluid in the sense it's changing every moment and it's very individual. So your experience in interacting with an AI product is completely different from mine because it learns from your previous patterns, my previous patterns. It will be different next week than it was 2 weeks ago. And so this highly fluid, highly individualized, and ever-changing kind of nature makes it much harder to regulate, because how am I able to assess whether my rights have been violated now, tomorrow, the day after? How is an agency supposed to know whether laws like, let's take anti-discrimination laws, have been, you know, respected by these companies? Maybe there was a moment when they weren't. Maybe there were for me, but not for you. And I think we have seen plenty of examples, you know, the systemic discrimination of a number of AI applications, where we see that laws are not being respected and upheld, but where we have a problem of assessing how and applying oversight and ensuring accountability that Maria talked about. And I think all of these core elements are under huge pressure with the rapidly evolving market in these systemically impactful products.
I can see that both Maria and Tim have things to say, but since Maria was name-checked, she gets to answer here.
Okay, so let's connect it with the last panel on the economy and how they brought up technology as a disruptor, right? I feel sorry for governments who have to communicate with their people, because the design of the social media platforms, the world's largest distributor of news is Facebook, now called Meta. It's funny, from 2016 to today, we've changed names, but not that much in terms of design, right? So lies, this is a 2018 MIT study, lies spread 6 times faster than facts. I will tweet it so you can see that. That to me is like the upside down world, right? That's what brings you upside down. So the incentive structure, if we think economy, the trickle down effect didn't trickle down fast enough, and then the incentive structure is to inflame fear, anger, and hate. We've certainly seen the impact of that. I felt this, right? I was getting 90 hate messages per hour because I was targeted by information operations. Geopolitical power comes into that. So what did they conclude in the last panel? They concluded that the systems today do not have the mechanisms to deal with the world today. I would say the same thing. Our laws today are inadequate. The EU is starting to, DSA is out now, but it's inadequate to deal with this because what is driving this is profit. It is surveillance for profit. It's data and technology, and governance needs to come in. Last thing I will say on this is, I was in Paris early this year when we realized that 60% of the world last year is under authoritarian rule. This January, it was 72%. And then I was on stage with Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, and he said, in America, the toaster has to go through more safety regulations than the software that tracks you, that is with you everywhere you go. So that's the safety. So I go back, sorry.
No, that was great. I mean, I had an idea for an experiment. You tweet, lies spread faster than truth, six times faster than truth. I will tweet, lies spread faster than truth, 20 times faster than truth, and we'll see who gets more retweets. Tim.
Yeah, that's a good experiment. I think I might dissent slightly. I very firmly feel the government needs to have the resources and power to do what's necessary. But I do feel that we are missing a lot of information in order to act well in this space. I share this sense that slowing down might be good, not the least of reasons being that the creators of these technologies seem very concerned about them. I've never, since the nuclear fission, I don't think I've seen so many people who've created something say, I'm not really sure how I feel about this. In fact, it might be terrible. So that makes me nervous. But and this might represent a slight European-American split, I think the law does better in response to known harms that it understands. And the legal system is a blunt instrument, so is a regulatory instrument. And it could be you get completely obsessed with what we think AI is right now and do something, and it ends up being quite random and in fact counterproductive. I just think there's a lot of, we don't, for example, yet really have a commercial application. We don't understand the business models. So while I think we've moved too late with areas like privacy, where the United States has still never quite got to it, California accepted, and some other states, there is also the chance of just firing too fast, not really, and I'm not saying this because, that'll put America behind, just doing a bad job when you don't know what you're doing.
How much do you worry, when all the AI company leaders are going out there saying this could lead to the end of humanity, like this is it. How much of that was because it was sincere concern, and how much of it was because they're trying to provoke the government into overregulation to lock in their power?
That's my conspiracy theory. That's my deepest.
It's obvious economic interest, right?
Yes, that is my deepest concern.
Yes.
So in my heart, I'm an antitrust kind of person. I believe that excessive monopoly power, market power, is a threat to many values, including democracy. And it is very obviously in the self-interest of the most powerful tech platforms who are starting to see the first challenges to their business models.
Right.
We also, speaking as former Biden administration official, we also have them in court, now Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Amazon's not in court, trying to break them up. So they're starting to feel the heat a little bit, and the obvious threats from AI to the business model. So the best thing to prevent competition is to have the government on your side and to have a licensing regime where just a few guys get to play. So I don't think some of the scientists individually have this motive. I just do think it is very dangerous to overregulate in anti-competitive ways, and licensing is probably the worst.
Marietje, do you agree that licensing is just an absolutely terrible idea? We should not license the companies, and Europe may be headed in the wrong direction if they push for that?
I'll speak to licensing, but I wanted to pick up on another point that Tim made. Yes, regulation is often a response to known harms, but regulation is also a solidification of enforcement of known principles, agreed principles, like non-discrimination, to keep with the example, but also antitrust that you just mentioned. And I think that a lot of principles that have been non-controversial and enshrined in democratic societies for decades, if not centuries, are under pressure in new ways. And so it requires new action, not so much to do new things, but to actually prevent established principles from being eroded. Now, of course, I am equally skeptical and almost cynical when I hear the very CEOs warning for the technologies that they are driving at the speed of light to bring to market. I mean, if you're really so concerned, you take your hands off and you wait a little bit by pushing out these products. And indeed, licensing with companies would be a drawbridges up approach where the first to pass the post to get to a certain scale can say, well, this is now the norm of quality, give us a license, and all the others can pack up. I don't think that's where Europe is going, if that was in your question. The AI Act is designed in a different way. It's the law that's being finalized right now, a comprehensive AI law in Europe, which has promise. It also has problems. I think the choices that were made by the regulators were to build this law, which has a risk-based model similar to what NIST does in the United States, build it on top of existing policy frameworks. So to say, we know how to scope products for risk. We're going to make a scale from low risk to high risk and present mitigating measures accordingly. So more mitigating measures, obligations on the part of companies when they create products that have high risk for people's liberty, for people's access to education, for people's access to labor, and so on and so forth, and fewer obligations when it is, let's say, a customer service chatbot or something. The flaws of that model were immediately confronted when generative AI came to market, because this law has been in the pipeline for over 2 years. And so European regulators were kind of scrambling, like, oh, what do we do now? And here's the challenge, because by choosing to regulate on the effect side, basically the downstream effects and where the risk gets created, and not regulating the technology as such, there's a friction there. And so they're trying to solve that now, and we'll have to see how it comes out. The thing that makes me hopeful, and that also kind of addresses some of the points that Tim mentioned, so maybe you'll have him speak next, is that there's an AI board foreseen, a group of experts that look for new developments, because we all know, we're talking about generative AI today, in 2 years it will be something else, and the law cannot follow the technology to the letter. It just cannot work that way. So this AI board is supposed to look out for new developments and then assess, where it should fall on the scale of risk. And I think the kind of model where there is a designated body, could be a regulator, that looks out for emerging technologies and their effects on these core principles that we have anchored into the law, and then assesses, should this fall within the high risk category or not, or should this fall within the AI Act, or is it rather a data protection issue? That is the kind of model that I think we see more of. Less strict on the letter of the law, more empowerment to the regulators, more mandate, more skills, more agency to assess what new technologies mean in light of principles.
Tim, I want to go to you to talk about where either upstream, middle stream, downstream, the most effective way to regulate is. But before we do that, I want to ask Maria about the actual effects to democracy, right? You've been living through the battle between authoritarianism and democracy. You've been watching it across the world better than anybody else. What is the most specific way new generative AI can undermine democracy and empower authoritarianism? Because that'll help us understand a little bit about where we want to put the regulations.
We can lose democracy by the end of next year. How's that for look, when we were looking at the number of elections between early this year into 2024, we saw 90 elections, right? What's the critical factor? Again, we're being insidiously manipulated. It isn't like the mistakes. It's not misinformation. It is disinformation. It is information operations. It is the way the platforms are designed, and this is still social media, and how geopolitical power has come in to insidiously manipulate you, using your emotions, right? And the smarter you are, sometimes the harder you fall. So what we've seen is, if we're already at 72% authoritarian, if you do not have integrity of facts, which is actually where we are, and one algorithm created this, right? The polarization you talked about earlier. It's a friends of friends algorithm that every social media platform uses. What does that mean? In order for you to grow your network, they A/B tested this so that they found out that if they recommend friends of friends, you're more likely to click to join to grow your network. When you grow your network, they grow their platform, right? Friends of Friends algorithm, and this is from the Philippines, in the 2014 was when the information operations began. Russian disinformation that led to the annexation of Crimea, used 8 years later to actually invade Ukraine itself, right? 2014 was when Marcos, the information operations of Marcos, began to change his name from a kleptocrat kicked out by people power in 1986 to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. 2016 was when the political dominoes began to fall. Duterte elected in the Philippines in May 2016. Then you had about a month later Brexit, and then you had all of the elections down to something Hillary Clinton knows very well, the 2016 elections here in the United States. You know that 126 million Americans were touched by Russian disinformation. So what does that mean? If you don't have sorry, let me just show you what happened in the Philippines. There's so many things to say. If you're pro-Duterte in 2016 in the Philippines, you move further right. If you're anti-Duterte, you move further left. And this continued over time because it is a growth algorithm that was used for millions and millions and tens of millions of people, right? You're talking about 3.2 billion at that point on just one platform. I had more than 10 arrest warrants in 2019. And I could have gone to jail for over a century. I turned 60 yesterday, so I wouldn't have lived all the way through it. But
CRISPR works.
I know. But the best part is, that we did stand up for principles, for values, and I now, in 2023, think 2016 to 2023, I only have 2 criminal charges left, but there's still an overhang, the Damocles sword hanging over Rappler. We could get shut down any day. We will fight it. But why does it take so much from the journalists to fight something that just gives more profit for these companies and that has frankly insidiously manipulated everyone on social media? Let me do one last thing. Your question is really, what will generative AI do? It's going to get worse, right? Guys, your election's here. And again, I look at Taiwan in January, Chinese disinformation attacking. Taiwan has already said they're getting clipped. Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population, the front runner in Indonesia is the son-in-law of former President Suharto, who was in power for almost 32 years, right? His son-in-law is front runner if the elections were held today. Anyway, I'll go through all, you know when your elections are. So the question is, now we have Twitter turned X with Elon Musk. When the paper in MIT was done in 2018, it was lies spread 6 times faster. I would love to see that study done again today because I'm sure it spreads even more, right? So the safeguards that were put in place in after 2016, after we haven't even talked gendered disinformation and how that tears down democracy, right? But after these safeguards were put in place and they were not enough. Again, I know this personally. I can give you all the data. This is what kept us moving. It's going to get worse. Generative AI. You can have a video of you saying saying lies, things you never would have said, but it would have been released in the public sphere and done its damage. And your fact check is not going to get the same wide distribution. So buckle up, I think, Karen said. It's going to be must act now.
My 13-year-old son made that very video last week. We were having a good time with generative AI tools. So this doesn't sound great, Maria. Tim.
Yes,
Where's the proper place to change policy so that everything goes a little bit better? Do you want to set the market conditions so we have a fully competitive market? Do you want to figure out specific ways to regulate the specific companies that are in the middle of this? Do you want to have specific policies, like every AI has to declare that they're real or they're not real?
Yeah.
Or do you want to have just sort of enhance the laws that exist right now to apply to AI? Where on this kind of stream of potential places to regulate is the most important place to go?
No, I appreciate that. So I feel there's both too much and too little going on at the same time in terms of regulatory activity. So I think, to pick up on what Maria's saying, that there is much too little attention to known harms,
Yes.
like human impersonation being the most obvious example. I can't think of anything good that comes out of AIs pretending to be humans, because it's an easy way to attack a democratic system. Democracies depend on human feedback, and if anyone can be a human, this is a huge problem. A tiny version of it is when comment systems get overwhelmed in the US federal government by people pretending to be human. People pretending to be human voting is obviously terrible, and people pretending to be human, saying they support a candidate or whatever it is, misinformation, disinformation. None of that is good, and we do way too little about misinformation, way too little about fraud, way too little about attacks on election integrity. Maybe we've gotten a little better. So the known harms, we're trapped in this weird conversation about, which is a lot of fun to talk about whether AI is going to become intelligent and have some kind of Terminator thing. But then we have a lot of known harms going on, like attacks on election, not enough resource, not enough time, and not enough even legislative activity. So I think there's a misallocation of thought in this area as to what we should be doing. On the bigger question, a debate we often had on the competition side in the White House was, I think, a really hard policy question, which is whether we think generative AI is more like nuclear fission or more like general computing, both two 1950s, 60s kind of technologies. If it's more like nuclear fission, you don't necessarily want a lot of startups getting into it and seeing what they come up with. Not exciting to anybody. And in fact, we locked down nuclear fission, I think, after we saw some of the results of atomic weaponry. On the other hand, computing, general purpose computing, semiconductors, transistors, was also very disruptive, ended up changing the world in powerful ways, was also, let's move to the 70s, dominated by IBM and maybe a few other companies. And we had a very different approach. We said it is our comparative advantage as a country to break up these monopolies. We broke up AT&T, we almost broke up IBM, and we'll give a little room for these tiny little startups like Apple, this weird dude, in Washington State, Bill Gates, who has this weird little company, Sun Microsystems no longer. So we took it very different, and that, speaking economically now, played to the comparative advantage of the United States, which has always been in small inventors, allowing a lot of stuff to happen, and ultimately coming up with better products. I'll say at the same time, Japan and Europe were like, no, we're sticking with the big guys. And I can't think of Japan doubled down on their biggest supercomputing monopolists. And, they've kind of missed the boat. And Europe has some very good tech companies. But all of the American tech companies came out of this kind of open competition. So that's a hard question either way. Obviously, I don't want to be the person who prescribes the policies that lead to the takeover of humanity by robots, which is why I think we need to figure out what we're dealing with here. Yeah.
I've listened to a bunch of your podcasts. I would have thought pretty strongly that you are on the side that it's less like nuclear fission and more like personal computing, and therefore we should allow lots of startups to go.
I think so. Yes. I mean, I'm saying, I'm putting myself a caveat in case the robots take over.
Marietje, which do you think it's more like, personal computing, nuclear fission?
Well, simply by the ingredients that are needed to produce generative AI, only a handful of companies have those. So even if you allow a gazillion startups to bloom right now, they can't.
Yeah.
And I think you could argue that that's a product of a lack of competition intervention, of a lack of data protection laws, because of this whole scraping model where companies simply, hoover up all the data that is available either in your publication or those of others. And so I'm inclined to try to seek ways by which we can have research, academic research, independent research into what AI and generative AI truly are. I think it's hard to compare to anything that came before. And perhaps if we try to find analogies, we confine ourselves to imagining what the impact of the technology could be, and also to what the kind of solutions should be. So I also think there's a risk in trying to work only with the policy instruments that we've known, which I see happening over and over again. I would love for much more creative, out-of-the-box policy entrepreneurship to truly answer what the challenges of today are. and not so much thinking like, oh, let's open up the toolbox and see what we have, because that is what's happening, and it's probably inadequate.
What is the most, I mean, you're known as a particularly creative legislator. You have a wonderful reputation for being deep inside of technology. What is the most creative idea you've heard for regulating AI that you're drawn to?
You know what? I wish I'd heard more ideas. I think we live in a very peculiar moment right now, and I've never seen this before. We can safely say that all around the world, City Council of New York, State of New York, federal government of the United States, United Nations around the corner, the EU, the Netherlands, ASEAN, OECD, everywhere in the world, AI and generative AI is at the table. It's on the political agenda. There's an enormous political will on the part of political leaders to do something. I think there's an enormous vacuum of ideas of what to do. And one of the problems, and I come back to the first challenge that you put before us, one of the problems is that we are incapable of independently assessing what we're really dealing with. I mean, I work at Stanford with people who build foundation models, who are educated to go to the big tech companies, who are the top academics in the field of technology, and they do not have the access to information to do research on similar models as the one that OpenAI presents to us, or that Google presents to us, et cetera, et cetera. So there is essentially no public knowledge equivalent of what the companies know. And this creates a problem for any well-informed public policy debate, for any ability of people to then take the proper steps, to kind of weigh the trade-offs, right? I mean, politics is all about trade-offs. That's why I sometimes smile when people say, like, are you in favor or against regulation? It's like, well, it's kind of a pathway that can lead you to a gazillion destinations. And I think we owe it to ourselves to sort of make the discussion about tech regulation more sophisticated. What do we want to regulate for? Do we know what we need to know? And perhaps the first steps are to actually have provisions enshrined in law enforceable about transparency, so that we can have that first step. So what has happened in the EU with the Digital Services Act is actually have a provision that guarantees access to information on social media platforms for academics. So besides the law putting new obligations on the tech platforms for content moderation, which is what this law is about, it also looks at how academic researchers can in turn look at what the companies are doing. And I think that kind of dynamic is what we need to build in systemically so that we can have better decisions.
That's a good point to make here at Columbia University.
A
Maria.
really simple solution on this, right? Like right now, agile development, which is the way code is rolled out, operates in 2-week sprints, right? So if you create a law, it takes 3-4 years, maybe more. The tech companies would have already evolved every 2 weeks. So we just rolled out an app, right? It's an alpha. We're testing it ourselves, and it's not released to the public because we care about the harm to the public. Why can we not prevent public rollout until transparency, safety? If at the very least, if they're experimenting, you don't have to stop experimentation, but you make them liable for it. Right now, there's impunity in rolling code out to the public. Again, I'll go back to my coronavirus vaccine, right? Like, I'm going to give vaccine A to this side of the room. I'm going to give vaccine B to this side of the room. Vaccine A people, sorry, you died. Apologies. And we have vaccine B. Is it worth the death? Because, and again, I'm not being, it's not hyperbole. Myanmar, genocide happened, right? And both the UN, which Marzuki Darusman, who was the former Commission on Human Rights in Indonesia, he led a team there. Meta sent a team there, and they both came back with the platforms played a role. But so that's an easy one. Prevent the rollout to the public until we know what it is. The other one is in the DSA, which is to give us a real-time data feed. Because right now, the tech companies prevent each of us from combining the data that they combine with impunity, right? If you're an academic who scrapes it, Laura Edelson, right? We know this, you get threatened with a suit, with a legal suit. So why is it okay for the tech companies to combine data from different sources, but they will prevent users from doing that? Once we get real-time data access, then we can pull up and see the trends. Is it going to be harmful to kids? Is it coded bias? Is it coded bias against black women, right? Or women of color, or LGBTQ? These are things we cannot see by talking about it. We must see the data.
Tim, is Maria right? She solved it.
Yes, she's absolutely right about everything. Solved all our problems. I do have what I think are some creative ideas for legislation, which maybe I'm one beat before. But I do think that this problem of human impersonation should be more seriously taken care of. And that you should have, maybe it's transparency, I'm not sure, but AI should proactively announce to the world that they are not humans. Now, it's not entirely new. I stole it from a movie called Blade Runner, which had that same law. So I am, some disagreement between friends. But I do think it's important to look back at history and what has worked and what has not worked for our lessons. I think we do a better job. We will do a better job that way. I'll also say, in a mild dissent from you've got all the answers, it isn't the fact that there will be no remedies if AI, an AI is harmful. We still have the laws. And ChatGPT, some of these LLMs pretty quickly started to defame people.
Yeah.
If you started asking people about things, I don't want to defame anyone on stage, so I won't say examples, but you could ask them things and they would say things that in the law are considered per se defamation. Someone was a criminal, someone was a criminal, someone had a loathsome disease, someone's bad at their job, at other categories. And they were sued and might win. So there is this kind of underlying framework. The courts I wouldn't count the courts out, let's put it that, or existing law entirely. Because you did have that vaccine that killed half the people. There's murder law, there's genocide. There's some. But I do think the regulatory conversation needs to be already understanding there's a existing legal regime that deals with certain harms. Are there kinds of harms or proactive measures that were not taken? And I think that's what the good work will be in this space. The good work will not be just vaguely a law banning robot takeovers or very abstract stuff. It has to be where is it making? And a good example for me is this example of human impersonation. I think we almost need a robot code of conduct or some powers. Maybe the FTC can do it. The FTC is already trying. My former colleague and friend Lena Khan at the FTC is trying to develop the stuff to deal with discrimination AI.
Right.
But they need a little more room and actually more money, more resources to try to be acute to these harms. But I am a strong believer in tough regulation to known harms, and we're already seeing some of them. We're not doing enough.
All right, Marietje, let's wrap this up. Can you evaluate, thumbs up, thumbs down, Maria's proposal that we have a 2-week waiting period, Maria's proposal that we have total data transparency and sharing, and Tim's proposal that all aides have to declare who they are? Which of these regulations do you like, which do you not like, and then you can add one to the mix and we'll call it a day.
I think both are very good, but they get at parts of the problem. And I think we need a more systemic way of looking at how AI works and have the ability to deal with it in the public interest. So I think a delay of pushing into market is a great idea, but then we also need regulators with the proper means, and Tim said they need a little bit more resources. I think they need exponentially more resources. Somebody has to make the case, maybe it should be an AI company tax specifically, to go into the public purse, to actually create these capabilities, because the asymmetry in information, the asymmetry in budgets, the asymmetry in therefore power is so significant that needs to be tackled too.
All right, well, I feel like the asymmetry in my understanding of how to regulate has shifted a little bit. Thank you for this amazing panel, these wonderful people who are all doing so much good in the world. Thank you for hosting us here.